We're just going to go straight into this. The legacy of faith-driven businesses. My name is Dayalan. I have a background in property for a long time. And basically, I have a real strong interest on entrepreneurship, but especially on Christian entrepreneurship as well. So I'd love to connect with you and just, speak afterwards, or, feel free to just write in the chat as well. It's going to be very informal. We're just going to go through 4 different businesses. And yeah, so I just want to give you a definition what we're going to be talking about. So faith-driven businesses. For me, a kingdom business is one that seeks to operate on principles and values drawn from and consistent with the revelation of God's word. That's a definition by Michael Bear. Another one is that faith-driven businesses are entities set up to intentionally glorify God, make a profit, support the work of Christ, and spiritually impact your sphere of influence. And if you could just not stop the share for a second. What I was going to say is that with faith-driven businesses, we can either explicitly say our business is to do with our faith or not. There's no right or wrong way. So either way, for example, Chick-fil-A, they have in their mission statement saying that their vision is to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that is entrusted to us. So that's a very explicit, we are a Christian business. There's plenty of other businesses that aren't as explicit, but that still doesn't deter from the fact that they are very strong faith-driven businesses and they're there to glorify God. And for example, The Entertainer, which is a toy shop here in England as well, is closed on Sunday. So they're very explicit about their faith. So just over the next 15, 20 minutes, we're going to go through a few quick stories, and they're going to just be snippets. But the main thing is that for us to be inspired and also educated about some of the things that Christian businesses from the past and present do and did. And the main point I want to get across is they're ordinary people. Whether you're a business person or you're looking to get into business, we're all ordinary people. We might not be the most qualified, we might not be the most wealthy or the most connected. And it's the same with each of these people. But they were all used beyond their wildest dreams but by God. And for me, I think some of these stories, especially the first couple, it really could be made into films. You don't get many business films, not enough of them, but definitely not Christian business films. So maybe that's an idea for one of you if you're interested. And I'm only going to give quick snippets on the stories, and then we can find out more, how you can find out more at the end. And I just pray that many more of these kind of stories come to pass over the next few years, and especially among people on this call as well. So I'm going to start with a guy called Henry Heinz. You might recognize that his surname. So famous for the Heinz story. And what it is he was one person. Oh, we can stop the share for now. Sorry, I'm just going to quickly share his story, and then we can go through those lessons. The first thing is that he was obsessed with learning and experimenting. So at a young age, even at 10 years old, he would work in his mum's garden farm and picking horseradish and learning about farming. And he really wanted to save people time. So what he started to do is pack up some of this horseradish and pickles, put it in a packet and sell it to all the neighbors. So he started with a little basket, and then as he got more popular, he got a cart and then a wagon. But something happened in the 1870s when he was a little kid, and he was a teenager by then. But there was this a recession basically, and he lost a lot of money. He went bankrupt, and so he was very demoralized. But one thing he did is he set up a book that he wrote down, a moral obligation book, which basically says that even though he didn't need to pay any of his creditors back because he had gone bankrupt, he still was going to do it. And he made sure he never made that same mistake as well. So he went on to set up a new business. But the first thing he did for the next few years was just paying back all the creditors he owed from the last business. And he had a really good reputation from there. He was very keen to help others. When he set up his company, it grew very quickly, but he had a reputation for being an honest, humble guy, very transparent. He invited people to come into their factories to see how it was run. And even the fact that the clear bottles that he used, because at that time, a lot of other competitors would use dark bottles so that they could hide the impurities that were in there. But he used clear bottles because it was about showing how pure his products were. And he was very gracious to his staff when they made mistakes. And of course, then it became very, very famous in the decades to come. So ketchup and baked beans, as we know Heinz for today, just went across the country and even internationally. And it was a time where the railroads were coming in America. So that helped him a lot to transport all across the country. And you could say that he even went global before the brands of McDonald's and Coca-Cola. And it was shipping all around the world. And after that, before he died, he did set up foundations to make sure that the money that was going, because by then he was a very, very wealthy person, was going to many good causes. If we can just have the slides, just do a couple of points that we can learn from the Heinz story then. So for me, a few things. The first one is that failure was not a full stop for him. Even though he went bankrupt, he could have given up and never gone into business again, but he still wanted to. And this transparency that I talked about with his the cleanliness of his factories and the products, also reveals character, because he said the product is equivalent to the character of the person. And he also showed integrity. Like I mentioned, he had this moral obligation book to make sure he paid everyone back that he needed to pay back, whether legally he needed to or not. And one thing he showed in some of his adventures, he would always try to prioritize the Sunday school and the local church. So even when he got an opportunity to ship his product to the Far East, he was specifically looking at setting up Sunday schools and churches there as well, and obviously selling his product as well. And in his biography, somebody wrote of him, he did more for the church without being in it. Not that he wasn't going to church, but he wasn't a full-time pastor or anything like that. But he was able to fund a lot of ministry as a result of his business as well. And he had a local and global impact. He was able to still look after his local community, which suffered from a lot of dirty water. So he was on a committee to clean the water up there. And as I mentioned, his legacy of foundations that he was set up as well meant that he had a global impact as well. The second story, I'm going to go on a bit of a whiz tour of four businesses. The second one is Cadbury's. We all know the brand Cadbury's. It's all over the world now as well. But to understand the ethos of Cadbury, the Cadbury family, you really need to understand what the Quakers were all about. So in the 1800s, and now in fact Cadbury's was 200 years old last year, so 1824 it was set up. But around that time, there were the Quakers, and many of them got into business because they were actually social outcasts, the way they would do things and their principles. So they weren't even allowed to practice law and things like that. So many of them went into business, but they also went into business in partnership with each other, encouraged each other and helped each other. So Roundtree's, Fry's, and Barclays Bank, Lloyd's Bank, Hershey's, these are all names that were all Quakers. And the forefather of Cadbury's family and the business was a guy called John Cadbury. And he had this idea to make drinking cocoa. It was in a very primitive state, not as smooth as you would have now when you buy it from the shops as well. And he was wanting to do that because there was a real alcoholic kind of epidemic in the area, and he wanted to kind of solve that by giving an alternative to people to drink as well. But it's only when his business was passed on to his sons, George and Richard Cadbury, that milk chocolate came out that through all the experimenting. And then from there, we know famous Dairy Milk and all the other brands. And there was a real acceleration of growth as well. But what they're probably most well known for is how they've treated their staff, because they set up a thing called a garden factory. So rather than have a factory where there's so much pollution and the staff are getting ill from working there, he set up Bourneville, which we know from the brand name Bourneville. But that was a town near Birmingham where he set up a garden factory, which had, at the time it was revolutionary. It had staff canteens, cricket pitches, housing for all the staff nearby. And it was visited by many other businesses trying to copy that model as well. And then as the chocolate business grew, then he got a lot of competition from Switzerland and, Nestle and Lindt and all these other companies there. Some of them were trying to buy the UK brands, but he made sure that they were protected and tried to collaborate with these other UK brands, even though they were competition. And then as they became very wealthy, they went into buying newspapers so that they could have national influence on different areas that were affecting society. So they really became known as social reformers more than even chocolate makers as well. And they even went on to be international advocates to campaign for anti-war and anti-slavery as well. And as we know, they went all around the world, but they also believed as Quakers to be very simple living. So they set up trusts for all the wealth that they did have to make sure that the money goes into the right hands as well. Later on, much later on, in recent times, they actually got bought out by Kraft, the American food and drink giant. But the irony is that then that Kraft merged with Heinz. So the story that we just talked about, it actually came back full circle. So what can we learn from Cadbury's? Just in a nutshell, if we can share this slide, the lessons from Cadbury. The first one is that for them, staff welfare was this high priority. They really treated staff like they were their family, and they were just streets ahead of any other company at the time in terms of how they looked after the staff, how they paid for their staff, how they gave holistic care to the staff as well. And as I mentioned, they were social reformers. They didn't look at business as just a money-making thing. They thought, how else can we use our influence? So they reformed, things like getting rid of child labor and the poor working conditions, and also making sure women's pay was increased significantly as well. And they were very much true to their roots. Even when they became wealthy, they didn't live a lavish lifestyle. They made sure that what God had blessed them with, they were giving back to society. And they also actually, one thing that you can learn from them is that competitors were never their enemy. They didn't see Roundtree and Fry, the other chocolate manufacturers that were growing at even a faster rate than them. They never looked at it as an enemy, and they did meet together as a Quaker society to see how they could improve the lives of other people rather than just compete with each other. And lastly, their foundations and trust just exhibited this extravagant generosity, this philanthropy that was just at the time just way beyond other companies would even think about doing. So yeah, thank you for that. We'll go on to the next company, which was Hobby Lobby in America. You might not have heard of this brand. It's very similar to Hobby Craft in the UK, what they sell. It was set up by a guy called David Green. He's still alive today, and much of his family are in the business as well. But all his siblings, he grew up in a very devout Christian household, but all his siblings became full-time pastors, and he was the only one that wasn't, even though his parents wanted him to become one. But he started working in a craft shop. But in the 1970s, he actually thought, I'd like to set up my own craft shop. So he actually started buying a wood chopper and wood, and then getting his kids to even make small picture frames in his garage, and even paying them 7 cents an hour to start with. He opened a store soon after that, and the rest was history. Through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the noughties, he just kept expanding. And so his first store, even though it's set up exactly the same as the current store in terms of the hours were short so that they could give staff lots of time off, and Sundays they were closed, a bit like the Entertainer. They went on to have almost 1,000 stores across the US, but very much retained that culture, even at that size, the family culture. They would start their staff meetings with prayer. They would ask staff members if they wanted to become Christians, that kind of thing. But one key thing that he did is that he made sure that he was not owning the business as right. And even the family that got involved, none of them owned the business. They were stewards of the business on God's behalf. And so they didn't keep the wealth for themselves. Again, they set up trusts and made sure that succession would be there for them their kids wouldn't get necessarily the money from the business unless they were working in it and drawing a salary as well. And they were very explicit about their faith. They were closed on Sunday. Even to this day, if you go to a Hobby Lobby store in America, they'll have a sign on a Sunday saying closed in order to have time for family and worship. So what can we learn from the lessons from Hobby Lobby? For me, firstly, no matter how big they got, they still maintained a family culture. It's a very difficult thing to do as you grow among management and everything else, to still instill that same family culture and the care for the employees, or they did that really well. And their biblical principles about looking after the Sabbath and making sure your family is looked after meant that all the staff had very healthy boundaries. And they did that not just in terms of close on Sundays, but they had the shortest hours, opening hours, compared to any other competitor, because they were insistent on, staff going home to put their kids to bed, and even management not doing more than a usual week, even whatever level of seniority they were at as well. And they set up structures for the long term and succession to make sure that no one that was involved with actually running the business would get spoiled by the wealth and the trappings of success as well. And lastly, the last story is Ritz Carlton in America. So this was a guy called Horst Schulze. He was trained in Germany at a time where his family were quite embarrassed. They wanted to go into hotels because they didn't really look at that as a proper profession. But he was a busboy that was starting with cleaning duties. And he worked in America for Hyatt and the Hilton. And then he set up his own luxury hotel, 1983, the Ritz Carlton, which went on to do really well. But the first couple of years, he felt strongly that God wanted him to plant his own hotel chain. But after a couple of years, he started to doubt it, and he said to his wife he might pack it in. And his wife said, "Why would you want to argue with God? We know that this is God's will." And he went on through the 80s and 90s and again the noughties to expand all over the world. And their hotel was always centered on impeccable customer service. They even had a story where, one of the guests lost their wedding ring in the sand, and he even made sure that his staff went out and bought metal detectors to make sure that the next day they would have their ring, and they presented it to them when they came down for breakfast the next day. So that kind of level of customer service as well. And he treated his staff really, really well, knowing that that was the key for them to then treat clients very well as well. They became the #1 luxury hotel brand in the world for several years. But he actually would say, self-confessed, that he had a nominal faith, but until he got diagnosed with cancer when he was 57. And the cancer story is amazing in itself, because the doctors told him he was going to have between 8 months and 1 year to live. But God actually healed him. And he says his faith then took a new level, because there he felt like before that he was more a Sunday Christian, and his faith became more active rather than passive. And now he's still living today, 86, and he's known for his excellent leadership skills and coaching, and he advises on several boards as well. So a couple of things that we can learn from the story of Ritz Carlton as well. The first thing is that he instilled this culture of excellence, and we can still have that spirit of excellence as Christians as well, and especially that verse that he would quote, "Whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might," in Ecclesiastes 9:10 as well. So he always had that motto that if you can improve something, you have to. We can be the best in any sector since we have God on our side as well. And he would always quote this St. Benedict's Guide to Hospitality when he was training his staff. And it simply says, if a guest arrive, treat them like if it was Jesus himself. He had this motto, ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen. And so that was his company motto. But also, like I mentioned, his illness was pivotal in his faith as well. So you would think that at the worst time that, you would be kind of discouraged and everything else in your faith, but that actually helped him to have a stronger faith as a result. And even as a busy executive, when he's traveling all around the world, he still made time to attend Bible studies and hold regular seminars when he was back in the US at his home on different aspects of his faith, and invite 50 people at a time over just to discuss a different faith topic as well. So that's it in a nutshell. We've just done a very quick tour round. If you want to know more, there's these further resources which I just want to highlight as well. These 4 stories are based on, when I've read 4 books on each of them as well. And there's different ways you can read these books. You can be inspired and just think, wow, I'd never be able to get to that level. So you can either think, oh wow, or you can read it and think there's some secrets there that I can put into practice in my own business. And so that's how I'd encourage you to read that as well. Not with a view to you'll never get to that level, but what are the things that I can take from there and put into practice? So these are the books. You can take a screenshot if you want to. Leadership Not by the Book by David Green. Henry J. Heinz, A Biography by E. McCrafferty. Chocolate Wars by Deborah Cadbury, who's obviously a descendant from the Cadbury family. And Excellence Wins by Horst Schulze, who set up Ritz Carlton as well. There's also a podcast, which I recommend, Faith Driven Entrepreneur. I have got involved with that movement. They started off in America and they've been more and more active in the UK as well. And I'm involved with some of their coaching as well. And just to end, before we'll have a couple of comments, and feel free to ask any questions as well, I just want to talk about, summarize in 4 quotes each of these people and some of the things that they stood for as well. And the first one is Henry Heinz. He said, quality is to a product what character is to a man. George Cadbury, he said, no man ought to be compelled to live where a rose cannot grow. We might live in places where roses can't grow, but the idea is that he believed in a fair place to live for everyone, and that would actually help them thrive in other areas of their life as well. David Green, who set up Hobby Lobby, the worst thing you can do is to achieve success but lose your family. That's why he's very insistent that his family's faith and the descendants that to come would be the most important thing, and he wouldn't want to spoil that by giving them more money than they could know how to handle. And Horst Schulze, his company motto, which I mentioned earlier, ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen. So that's it in a nutshell. Thank you very much for listening. If you've got any comments, questions, please feel free to write in the chat box. I'd love for you to follow me. I'm across on all the social media platforms and Dayalan Mahesan. And if you have a particular interest within Christian business, I'd love to hear from you and connect with you, and perhaps connect you with other people as well.